When the wild strikes without warning, survival is the only fight. From frozen glaciers to crowded parks, bears appear with sudden fury, turning peace into chaos. Ordinary people are left with scars, shattered bones, and haunting memories. In this video, we uncover 6 chilling encounters where predator and human paths crossed, and survival hung by a thread. On July 7, 2025, 3 friends biked through Yellowstone's shadowed backcountry trails. Liam Carter, fearless and daring, pushed every jump. Ava Ramirez, a strong university athlete, kept the group balanced. Ethan Kim, quiet but skilled, carried his camera to capture wildlife. Their friendship was built on countless adventures, often along hidden paths away from crowded parks. This summer ride promised laughter, speed, and memory-making, until the dense forest revealed a force far more powerful than any trail they had ever faced. As the sun climbed higher, light pierced the trees in broken rays, catching the spray of dirt and pine needles beneath their tires. The group pressed deeper into the wild, weaving between thick trunks and sharp bends, chasing thrills with every jump and skid. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, and silence filled the spaces between their tires as they scraped against the stone. But beneath that stillness, hidden behind layers of brush, a heavy presence stirred. A massive grizzly, restless from the season and fiercely protective, watched the riders draw near. In an instant, that silence was shattered as the great beast exploded from the shadows, its body a wall of fur and fury, charging with unstoppable force. Liam was midair, balanced on a log ramp, his wheel lifting in a sharp trick when the bear's claws struck him mid-flight. He was flung sideways into a jagged boulder, the impact snapping through his body as claws raked across his shoulder and arm, tearing deep lines of pain. His bike clattered away, its frame twisted against stone. The sudden attack was as fast as a lightning strike, leaving no room to think, only to endure. Ava, only feet behind, reacted on instinct, steering her bike directly toward the chaos, hoping to draw the fury away. The grizzly swiped once, its power sending her tumbling headlong down a steep slope. Her body hit hard, a rib crushed beneath her, skin torn by sharp branches that carved deep gashes across her back. Ethan, thrown into panic, tried to turn sharply, his tires skidding over a slick route. He barely managed to stay upright, only to feel the bear's massive weight slam him against a fallen tree. Its paws raked his legs and torso, tearing through fabric and flesh, pinning him in place like prey. Their bikes were scattered, their wheels bent, helmets cracked. The trail itself was marked with the violence of the attack. The forest filled with screams, raw cries for help, echoing through the high canopy as the grizzly towered over its victims. The wilderness that had moments before felt alive with joy now throbbed with danger, each second dragging into eternity as the bear's rage held them trapped in a nightmare. The terror had only just begun, and the fate of the 3 riders now hung in a fragile balance between survival and the untamed wrath of Yellowstone's most feared predator. The screams that tore through Yellowstone's backcountry still echoed when the desperate sound of rescue finally cut through the chaos. The sharp blasts of ranger flares cracked the air, their glow streaking red against the trees, while the heavy spray of deterrent mist rolled through the brush. The great bear, startled by the sudden burn in its eyes and nose, hesitated for a moment before retreating deeper into the forest. Its massive form vanished into the shadows, leaving behind a trail of broken branches, bent bikes, and the battered bodies of 3 riders who had faced its full wrath. The silence that followed was heavy and strange, as if the woods themselves were catching their breath after the storm. Rangers rushed forward, pulling Liam away from the sharp rocks where blood soaked his torn gear. His shoulder hung in shreds, and his arm lay limp, but he was alive, his chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. Ava was next, dragged up from the slope where she had landed among splintered branches. Her rib was fractured, her back carved with deep wounds, yet she clung to consciousness, her eyes fixed on the rescuers as they wrapped her tightly to stop the flow of red. Ethan, pinned against the fallen tree, struggled to move his legs, both marked by the long rake of claws. He was lifted gently onto a stretcher, his face pale, his lips pressed thin in pain, but still aware of his friends' cries around him. The aftermath of the attack spread across the trail like a grim painting. Twisted bicycles lay in heaps, wheels bent at unnatural angles, helmets cracked down the center, their packs were scattered, contents spilling into the mud. Branches snapped under boots as the rescuers moved quickly, working to stabilize all three. The ground bore deep claw marks, scars left by the power of an animal defending its place in the wilderness. Every detail spoke to the sudden and unforgiving nature of the wild when humans and beasts collided without warning. Hours later, as helicopters thumped overhead, the three injured riders were lifted into the sky, carried toward hospitals beyond the trees. The forest below seemed unchanged, its vast green canopy stretching on, but for those who had survived, nothing would ever look the same again. Their bodies carried scars that would heal slowly, but their memories would hold the sharp truth of how close they had come to death. Their survival was not just a story of rescue, but a reminder of how nature, untamed and raw, could strike without mercy. In the weeks that followed, news of the mauling spread far beyond the park. Families wept, friends gathered, and the images of shredded gear and bloodied bikes shook communities. Rangers spoke openly about how wildfires, changing seasons, and human activity were prompting bears to engage in more dangerous encounters. Yellowstone remained beautiful, but the shadow of what had happened hung heavy over its trails. Liam, Ava, and Ethan had survived, yet the mark of that day in July would live with them, as permanent as the scars etched across their skin. On August 8, 2024, Kodiak's harbor buzzed with gulls and boats, while inside the police station, Officer Silvera Sil Trent sorted reports at her desk. A decade on the force had shaped her from patrol officer into a respected investigator, admired for precision, calm under pressure, and quiet reliability. To colleagues, she was the steady core of the station. Yet that warm summer afternoon, amid shuffling papers and clicking keyboards, an unseen danger drew nearer than anyone could have expected. Behind the station, a large male Kodiak bear wandered near the service lot. The animal had been drawn from the dense forest by the strong smell of food left unsecured after a recent delivery. For days, it had roamed on the edges of town, growing bolder with each passing hour. Its size was immense, its body towering over cars and dumpsters, with a heavy coat that glistened in the sunlight. The hunger that drove it forward was relentless, and its path led it directly toward the station, a place thought to be safe from such wild threats. Without hesitation, the beast smashed through a side entrance, the wooden frame and thin door crumbling beneath its weight. The sudden crash sent a shock through the building. Filing cabinets toppled to the ground, spilling folders and scattering papers like leaves in the wind. Desks rattled, glass cracked, and the air filled with the thunderous sound of claws scraping against hard surfaces. Sil, caught only a few steps from the chaos, tried to retreat, but the giant bear's speed was unmatched. With one brutal surge, it lunged across the room and slammed her against a cold steel desk. Pain tore through her body as claws ripped deep across her shoulder and chest, leaving long red trails that cut through her uniform. The crushing weight drove into her ribs, snapping bone and forcing the air from her lungs. Blood poured freely as Sil fought to crawl beneath the desk, every breath shallow and sharp. She clutched the floor, her strength fading while the animal continued its rampage. Around her, the sound of shattering glass filled the station as the bear struck at windows and clawed through scattered files. Growls rumbled through the room, low and terrifying, shaking those who had taken cover. Several officers locked themselves in nearby rooms, their hearts pounding as they listened to the destruction spreading through the building. The sense of safety that once surrounded the station dissolved in an instant, replaced by panic and fear. The beast pressed forward, tearing through walls and scattering fragments of paperwork, its roar echoing louder than the alarms that now blared. Each second stretched long as Sil bled beneath the desk, trapped between survival and collapse. The station, meant to be a place of order, had become a scene of chaos under the power of an unstoppable predator. The beast's rage seemed endless as the alarms blared and the smell of blood filled the station. Papers floated through the air while shattered glass littered the floor, catching the harsh glow of the emergency lights. Beneath the desk, Officer Silvera Trent clung to life, her breath shallow and her uniform soaked in red. Every second felt stretched as the animal stomped and tore at the office, forcing furniture to collapse under its weight. The sound of claws on metal and wood echoed through the narrow halls, leaving those hidden in nearby rooms frozen in fear. Outside, the disturbance reached the ears of the tactical team stationed only a few blocks away. Trained for critical threats, they rushed toward the chaos, their vehicles cutting through traffic with sirens wailing. As they arrived, the ground seemed to vibrate with the heavy steps of the giant creature. It had already destroyed cabinets, walls, and stacks of reports, leaving the building in ruins. The officers inside dared not move, terrified that any sound would draw the beast's fury closer to them. The tactical group moved quickly, setting up a perimeter and loading weapons not meant to kill but to frighten. Flares were fired, the bursts of light filling the air with smoke and sparks. The loud cracks of warning fire reverberated against the walls of the station, startling the bear. The animal roared, spinning toward the noise, its eyes glowing in the dim emergency light. For tense minutes, it seemed ready to charge again, but the bright bursts of flame and acrid spray forced it to stumble back. Growls rumbled deep in its chest as it finally retreated through the same side entrance it had destroyed upon arrival. When the danger cleared, silence fell heavy across the station. Desks were overturned, broken glass spread like ice across the ground, and papers hung half-burned from sparks. Officers slowly emerged from their barricades, their faces pale and their uniforms torn from diving to cover. Beneath the wreckage, Syl lay motionless, her body broken but alive. Blood loss had weakened her. Her chest rose only slightly with every breath. Emergency workers rushed to her side, lifting her carefully onto a stretcher. Sirens cut through the night air once again as she was rushed to the hospital. Surgeons worked for hours to repair the torn tissue in her chest and shoulder, stabilizing her breathing and treating the fractured ribs. The road to recovery would be long, filled with pain and rehabilitation. Her strength, once trusted by so many in the community, now had to be rebuilt one step at a time. The aftermath left more than just physical scars. The station itself bore deep marks of the encounter, walls clawed apart and furniture destroyed. Officers carried the memory of the helplessness they felt as their workplace turned into a battlefield. For the town of Kodiak, the attack served as a grim reminder that even concrete walls and locked doors could not guarantee safety when carelessness left food unsecured. The lesson lingered heavily in the minds of all who witnessed the destruction, a reminder of the raw force of nature that shared their land. On July 14, 2023, the volcanic valleys of Kamchatka stretched wide under a gray sky, their rocky slopes dotted with patches of snow and streams of meltwater winding between jagged ridges. Ivan Petrov walked steadily at the front of the group, his boots leaving careful marks on the uneven ground. Known in the region as a seasoned guide, he had spent most of his adult life leading travelers through landscapes both stunning and unforgiving. He grew up near the mountains, where wild winds swept across plains, and the sight of bears in the distance was common. Over the years, he developed a keen sense of reading the land, spotting signs of movement, and keeping hikers safe. He carried with him stories of eruptions, storms, and the raw strength of wildlife, which inspired both awe and caution in visitors. On this day, his experience and instinct were tested most harshly. The group followed him closely, taking in the striking view of lava fields and lush green valleys. Ivan checked their footing as the path narrowed, guiding them carefully past sharp stones and slippery soil. The ground trembled suddenly, and loose rocks broke free from the cliff above. A sharp rumble rolled across the valley, scattering small birds into the air. From the shadows of the slope, a massive brown bear erupted into sight, its fur bristling and its eyes wide with alarm. The animal had been resting when the noise startled it, and in its panic, it charged toward the group. Ivan reacted instantly. He saw two hikers frozen in place, their faces pale with fear. Without hesitation, he threw his body against them, shoving them aside before the rushing weight of the predator reached them. But his brave act left him exposed. The bear's bulk slammed into him, forcing him against the sharp edge of a boulder with crushing force. Pain shot through him as claws ripped across his torso and legs, tearing fabric and skin. The impact cracked ribs, and his breath came in jagged bursts as blood spread quickly across his jacket. He tried to resist, pushing at the heavy shoulders of the beast, but the animal swiped again, dragging him down into the rocks. His cries echoed across the valley as the bear's claws punctured deeper, grinding him into the jagged ground. The hikers stood in shock, torn between flight and the desperate need to help. Fear overwhelmed most, and one bolted down the path in search of help. Others stayed rooted in horror as the predator hovered above its fallen target, growling low and circling. Ivan's strength faded as the minutes stretched, and the stones beneath him darkened with spreading red. The valley's silence returned, broken only by the heavy breaths of the beast and the cries of those who witnessed. The ground, once only marked by footsteps, was now scarred by the violent struggle between man and nature. In that place, where volcanoes carved the earth and wildlife ruled, the fight for survival became painfully clear, and the danger that lurked in Kamchatka revealed itself in full force. The valley was quiet when the predator finally slowed its movements, circling the fallen guide with heavy breaths that stirred dust across the sharp ground. Ivan Petrov's body lay broken against the stone, his chest rising and falling in a weak rhythm, until the flow of blood overtook what strength he had left. The hikers who had been pushed away stood in shock, their faces pale, their limbs frozen between terror and grief. Some backed further along the trail, stumbling over loose gravel, while others remained fixed, unable to look away from the scene. The bear lingered, sniffing at the air, its fur streaked with dirt, its ears twitching at every small sound in the valley. For long moments the group felt trapped in a silence filled only by the low growl of the beast and the cries of the wounded man fading into stillness. One traveler, trembling with fear, forced himself to run down the uneven path, desperate to find help before the creature returned to strike again. Each step sent echoes bouncing against the cliffs as he vanished into the distance, leaving the others huddled together in dread. Minutes stretched like hours. The bear's massive body shifted from rock to rock, circling with slow intent, before it turned and retreated into the slopes, vanishing into the brush as quickly as it had arrived. Relief washed over the remaining hikers, but it was thin and brief, for the damage had already been done. The people crept back toward the boulder, their hearts heavy as they saw the lifeless form of the man who had shielded them. His jacket was soaked in red, his hands still curled in the dirt where he had tried to fight. Their voices shook with sorrow, yet they knew they had no power left to change what had happened. The valley around them, once a place of wonder, now felt like a graveyard of echoes, carrying the memory of a fight that ended in loss. With trembling arms, they tried to cover the guide with what spare fabric they had, giving him a final gesture of respect as the cold mountain air drifted across the slope. When the first signs of rescue appeared on the horizon, it was already too late. The team arrived with urgency, their boots striking the ground quickly, their packs heavy with medical gear, yet their faces hardened when they saw the still form on the rocks. They secured the group, checked injuries, and scanned the path for any sign of the beast. But the danger had already moved deeper into the wild. Their radios crackled with reports, carrying the weight of a loss that words could barely hold. The body was lifted carefully, and the valley was left silent once again, save for the distant call of birds returning to the cliffs. News spread quickly across the region. Villagers spoke of the guide's courage, recounting how he had placed others before himself when death seemed imminent. His name carried through towns and camps, remembered not only for his skill, but also for his sacrifice. The attack became a warning carved into memory, a story told with heavy voices about how sudden violence can rise from the quiet of the mountains. For those who walk that land again, the shadow of that day remained, a reminder that the wilderness does not bend, and that respect for its power is written in lives lost. On May 12, 2025, the sun cast bright light across Portland's largest public green space, where families gathered with baskets, blankets, and laughter. Among the tall trees and open lawns, Raina Calder moved steadily along her routine patrol. She had worked as a park ranger for years, trained in both conservation and safety, always attentive to the balance between people and nature. Her role was not only to protect visitors, but also to safeguard the wildlife that drifted into the city's edges. Her peers respected Raina for her calm presence and quick thinking, traits she carried after years of dedication to outdoor service. Her life revolved around long walks, careful observation, and the quiet duty of making sure that parks remained safe for everyone who passed through them. As she inspected the area that day, the park was especially busy. The smell of grilled food lingered in the air, children ran across fields, and parents watched from shaded benches. Near the forest edge, an unusual figure appeared, a young black bear, thin but curious, had wandered out from the dense woods, drawn by the scent of food left behind on picnic tables. Its dark coat and restless steps caught immediate attention. Murmurs rippled across the crowd, and tension spread as it climbed onto a colorful playground structure, claws scraping against the metal and plastic. Visitors froze in alarm, unsure whether to stay or flee. The carefree energy of the park quickly gave way to fear. Raina recognized the danger. She moved forward, steady yet cautious, determined to steer the animal away before panic broke out. The bear, however, was no longer timid. Startled by the crowd and noise, it suddenly dropped from the play structure and turned its focus toward the ranger. In a blur of motion, the animal charged, covering the distance with terrifying speed. Before she could fully react, the heavy body slammed into her, knocking her onto the hard ground. The force drove the breath from her lungs as she tried to shield herself. Claws raked across her upper body, tearing into her uniform and skin, slicing deep along her shoulder and chest. Pain surged as bone cracked, a rib giving way under the pressure. She struggled to twist free, but the bear pressed on, striking again. Its paws ripped across her arm, leaving open wounds that bled freely. The ranger rolled in desperation, scraping against the dirt. Yet the animal followed, swiping at her back and sides with unrelenting force. Each blow added to the agony, leaving her body torn and battered. The scene unfolded in chaos. Families screamed, some clutching children and running, others frozen in horror. Food scattered from overturned baskets, and bicycles were abandoned as people scrambled for safety. Amid the terror, Raina's mind burned with one last thought of survival. Reaching to her side, she grabbed the flare gun she carried for emergencies. With trembling hands and fading strength, she raised it toward the animal, pulling the trigger. A burst of fire and smoke exploded into the air, searing the space between them. Startled by the sudden blast, the black bear reared back, its growl echoing across the park before it turned sharply toward the trees. Blood still poured from her wounds as the smoke drifted away, and the black bear vanished into the thick tree line. Raina lay sprawled across the dirt, her uniform shredded and her body trembling from shock. Her breaths came in short bursts, each one sharp with pain as the broken rib pressed against her chest. Around her, the once lively park was silent, except for scattered cries in the distance. Abandoned toys, spilled food, and overturned strollers painted the ground with the chaos that had just passed. People had fled to the far edges of the park, some hiding behind vehicles, while others clutched their children close, still unable to process the horror they had witnessed. Raina tried to move, but every shift sent new waves of agony across her back and arms. The deep gashes burned, and the blood loss left her weak. Crawling inch by inch, she dragged herself away from the open space, pushing toward a bench where she might rest out of view. Her hand left a trail of red across the grass, and the effort drained her of what little strength remained. She could not stand, but her will to survive pressed her forward. Finally reaching the wooden seat, she slumped against it, her vision blurring as dizziness overtook her. By then, emergency calls had flooded the local dispatch center. Sirens began to echo in the distance, growing louder as first responders rushed to the scene. Within minutes, paramedics entered the park, scanning the scattered crowd for injured victims. When they spotted the wounded ranger, they ran to her side, cutting through the stunned silence with the sound of their gear. Kneeling beside her, they pressed bandages against the worst wounds, working quickly to slow the bleeding. Oxygen was fitted over her mouth, and words of calm encouragement were given, though she could barely register them through the haze of pain. Police officers secured the area, guiding frightened families to safety and warning them to remain alert in case the animal returned. Some visitors wept, while others clutched phones, recording the aftermath with shaking hands. A place once meant for laughter had turned into a scene of tragedy and fear, the memory of the attack etched into every witness. Wildlife experts were notified immediately and tasked with tracking the young bear that had caused such destruction. The forest around the park was searched for signs of its path, while rangers worked to ensure no other animals followed the same route. Raina was lifted onto a stretcher and carried toward the waiting ambulance. Her uniform, once a symbol of protection, was now soaked through with blood. She slipped in and out of consciousness as the vehicle sped toward the nearest hospital. Surgeons would later perform hours of work to repair her shattered rib, treat the torn muscle, and closed the deep wounds carved into her arm and back. Survival came at the cost of weeks of recovery, and the attack served as a grim warning for the city. The incident reshaped how officials viewed urban parks. Stronger measures were implemented, ranging from improved waste management to increased patrols at forest edges. Signs were placed to remind people that food carelessness could attract dangerous predators into public spaces. Parents who had once felt secure bringing children to play now carried the memory of that day, a reminder that wild creatures could appear at any time. For Raina, the scars left behind told the story of courage and survival, but also the price of protecting others in moments when nature crossed into the heart of the city. On June 2nd, 2022, the icy wilderness of Alaska's Wrangell Mountains became the stage for a terrifying ordeal that would test every ounce of strength and endurance within Callista Monroe. She was not a casual visitor to these harsh lands, but a skilled photographer who had built her life around documenting remote and dangerous places. Born and raised in Oregon, Callista had grown up with a love for wild landscapes, spending her teenage years hiking rugged trails and learning survival skills from her mountaineer father. By adulthood, she had transformed her passion into a career, traveling across continents to capture storms, glaciers, and the world's hidden corners. Despite her growing fame, she remained a solitary adventurer, relying on her preparation and instincts rather than large guided teams. This independence often placed her closer to peril than most, and the icy expanse of Alaska was no exception. That day, Callista had set her sights on the labyrinth of crevasses in the Wrangell Range, drawn to the surreal beauty of ice-blue pools formed by melting glaciers. The terrain was unforgiving, filled with sharp ridges and hidden drops, but she moved with practiced precision, her camera case slung across her back, her boots crunching over brittle snow. Hours of trekking through the frozen maze had left her chilled yet exhilarated, her lens capturing reflections of sunlight on crystalline surfaces. She was focused entirely on her work, unaware that danger was quietly shadowing her path. Nearby, a grizzly sow with two small cubs had been drawn to the same water source she sought. Their unseen trails were set to collide most violently. The confrontation erupted without warning. As Callista stepped onto a slick ledge between icy fissures, the massive bear roared from the shadows, her cubs scurrying behind. Startled and cornered, Callista instinctively raised the can of bear spray strapped to her belt and unleashed a sharp cloud toward the charging animal. The mist filled the air, but her footing betrayed her. The glacier's surface was treacherous, and her boots slid out from under her. She hit the ground hard, her head striking a hidden rock with a sickening thud. Before she could recover, the furious mother was upon her, claws ripping through her thigh and shoulder. The pain was blinding, her screams echoing across the frozen valley. Her wrist snapped as she tried to shield herself, leaving her nearly defenseless beneath the crushing weight of the predator. Still, Callista's spirit did not falter. She twisted and clawed at the icy ground, dragging herself toward a jagged ridge while the bear loomed above. Every movement left streaks of red across the white surface, her strength slipping with each passing second. Yet with one final desperate push, she hauled herself upward, clutching her bright orange camera case. The color was vivid against the glacier, and with the little energy she had left, she waved it frantically into the vast open sky. Somewhere above, a helicopter surveying the ice fields caught sight of her signal, and for the first time since the ambush began, hope pierced through the terror. Rescue efforts moved quickly once the helicopter team spotted the bright flash of Callista's signal. The pilot circled low, marking her location with flares while radioing rangers stationed miles away. Within minutes, trained responders began making their way across the icy ridges. The grizzly and her cubs had already retreated deeper into the glacial maze, leaving only the echoes of roars and the crimson trail across the ice. Callista remained sprawled on the ridge, her body weak and battered, clinging to consciousness as the cold seeped through her torn clothing. Each shallow breath was a fight, but the thought of being seen from above gave her a thin thread of strength to hold on to. When the ground team reached her, the scene was grim. Her leg wound ran deep, blood staining the snow beneath her. Her shoulder and arm were shredded, and her broken wrist hung uselessly by her side. The responders worked fast, stabilizing her head after spotting the signs of a concussion. Tourniquets were tightened, gauze pressed against gashes, and a thermal blanket wrapped over her shaking body to fight the bitter chill. Her orange case was strapped to the stretcher alongside her, the very item that had signaled her presence now serving as a reminder of how resourcefulness can tip the balance between life and death. The helicopter lowered a rescue basket, and within moments she was lifted from the icy cliffs, rising above the fractured valley that had nearly claimed her life. The flight to Anchorage was tense, the medical team fighting to control the bleeding and keep her conscious. Hours later, she was wheeled into surgery, where doctors repaired torn muscles, set her fractured wrist, and treated the deep claw marks that had cut through skin and bone. The work lasted through the night, and by dawn, she lay connected to monitors and tubes, alive but scarred by the experience. News of her ordeal spread quickly, both among local Alaskan communities and the wider world of adventurers who followed her work. Many were shocked that someone so experienced could fall into such danger, but those who knew the wild understood the truth. No amount of training or preparation could fully guard against the unpredictable power of a mother bear defending her cubs. Experts explained how food shortages and shifting patterns caused by melting glaciers had been drawing predators into unusual areas, thereby increasing the likelihood of sudden clashes, such as the one Callista endured. Her case soon became part of broader discussions about climate impacts and human risk in the backcountry. Weeks later, Callista began rehabilitation, learning to walk again with scars along her thigh and shoulder. Her camera case, still marked with scratches from the attack, was placed beside her hospital bed as both a token of survival and a reminder of the razor-thin line between exploration and tragedy. For her, the encounter would forever mark the cost of venturing into the extremes, a story etched not just in photographs, but in wounds that would remain long after the ice closed over the place where she fell. On July 18, 2021, the Arctic's frozen silence was broken by an event that documentary filmmaker Sable Thorne would never forget. She had spent years behind cameras, traveling across icy lands and stormy seas, bringing hidden parts of nature to screens across the world. Known for her patience and sharp eye, she was respected for capturing rare moments in some of the harshest regions on Earth. She had lived months at a time in camps where winds cut like blades and temperatures dropped lower than most could bear, and she had built a reputation as someone who could remain calm even when the unpredictable wild pressed close. Yet despite her long training and careful planning, the Arctic had a lesson waiting for her on that day. Sable had set up along a lonely cliff edge, her lenses trained on a series of white ridges that looked like frozen waves. Behind her lay the scattered gear of her small camp and a simple meal packed for the long filming session. Unknown to her, a massive polar bear had picked up the faint scent of food drifting through the cold air. From within a snowdrift, the animal stirred, its pale body blending almost perfectly with the land, each heavy step muffled by thick powder. As the sun struck the ice, the animal emerged without sound, a towering figure moving closer with the confidence of a ruler on its ground. The predator's focus was not on the human at first, but on the strange metal frames and tall tripods standing firm against the wind. It charged forward with sudden force, snow scattering under its weight as it lunged toward the equipment. The sharp swipe of its massive paw sent one tripod toppling, the crash echoing across the cliff. The roar that followed shook the still air, warning all within reach of its raw power. Sable turned too late, stumbling backward as the ground beneath her boots gave way. Her back slammed against jagged ice, ribs bruised from the hard fall. The animal's paw slashed the air inches from her shoulder, tearing through the fabric of her jacket and leaving shallow claw marks across her side. Her heart pounded as she scrambled to her feet, breath fogging in quick bursts. The cold world around her seemed to close in as the bear advanced, each step crunching through the frozen surface. She had seconds to act, her body aching from the fall, her mind racing. Her camera gear lay crushed, metal bent and glass shattered under the force of the assault. In desperation, she ripped open her pack and pulled out a reflective blanket. She shook it wide, the material catching what little light pierced the Arctic sky. A sudden flash danced across the snow, confusing the animal for a moment. Its head lowered, eyes narrowing, and then it lunged again, paws striking at the ground so close that icy fragments sprayed into the air. Just then, a distant sound cut through the moment, the steady beat of helicopter blades. The deep thrum grew louder, rattling the air above the cliff as helicopter rotors from a nearby supply drop shook the sky. The bear's ears twitched at the noise, its head turning toward the sound. Its growl echoed one last time before it retreated, vanishing back into the drifts from where it came. Sable collapsed onto the snow, her jacket torn, her body covered in bruises and scratches, her ribs aching with every breath. Around her, the wreckage of her equipment marked the violence of the encounter, leaving her shaken but alive as the Arctic silence returned. The frozen cliff was quiet again, but Sable Thorne's body shook with pain and exhaustion as she lay on the broken ice. The helicopter that had frightened the polar bear grew louder, circling before moving toward a supply drop farther down the coast. She pressed her torn jacket against her side, feeling the sting of shallow claw wounds and the deep ache in her ribs from the earlier fall. Her breath came in ragged bursts, the freezing air cutting into her lungs. Around her, shattered lenses and bent frames glittered like scattered glass against the snow, a clear reminder of how close the attack had come to ending her life. Dragging herself away from the wreckage, she reached a small outcrop of rock where her emergency pack had landed during the scramble. Inside, she found basic supplies: water, a flare, and a small first aid kit. Her hands shook as she wrapped gauze around her arm and pulled the blanket tight again to conserve warmth. Though her injuries were not fatal, the pain made every movement a battle. The Arctic seemed endless in its silence, yet every shadow of ice looked alive after what she had just faced. The thought that the bear could still be close filled her with dread, but the sound of the helicopter had given her a sliver of hope. Hours dragged on as she waited, watching the pale horizon for any sign of rescue. Bruises darkened across her body. Her ribs ached with each breath, and the cuts on her side left red streaks on the snow. Still, she refused to give in. She tore part of her ruined jacket into strips, fastening them to the broken tripod poles and planting them upright in the snow as makeshift markers. Each movement slowed her more, but the sight of those flags gave her the comfort of being seen if anyone returned overhead. The cold gnawed at her, yet the thought of survival kept her awake, forcing her to fight against the numbness that tried to overtake her limbs. When the helicopter finally appeared again, it hovered closer this time, its shadow sweeping across the ice field. Sable used her last flare, firing it upward in a burst of red light that streaked across the pale sky. The aircraft tilted, clearly spotting her, and within minutes, a rescue crew descended with ropes and harnesses. They found her battered, covered in bruises, and barely able to stand, but alive. She was lifted into the craft as the wind from the blades whipped snow around them, leaving behind the ruined remains of her equipment and the wide frozen plain that had almost claimed her life. In the weeks that followed, Sable spent long days in recovery, her body healing slowly from the trauma. The shallow claw marks closed, her ribs mended, and the soreness in her back faded with rest and care. Yet the memory of the white predator that had appeared without warning lingered in her mind. The attack became a sobering story shared among fellow filmmakers and researchers, a reminder that even skill and experience cannot erase the risks of working in wild, unpredictable places. For Sable, the encounter left her scarred but resolute, a survivor who had seen the raw edge of the Arctic and endured.